Hello, Jeff and Nancy. Thank you for coming by my office today to discuss your financial plan. I wanted to first let you know that I appreciate all the work that you have put in to gather all this information that has allowed me to put together this plan today. Today specifically, I'd like to focus in on some of the questions you had surrounding the equity and bond portfolios that you currently hold. I wanted to also mention that it is very encouraging to hear that both of you have taken an interest in becoming more knowledgeable about your investment management through those courses at local colleges, and I'm sure it will suit you moving forward as well as you continue to learn more about investments and learn more about how those investments affect your financial situation and plan as well. First off, I'd like to happily explain what the Trenner and Sharpe ratios are and when and why one is more appropriate to use over the other. So to start off, both terms are relative measures of performance. What that means is that they are a comparison tool you can use to compare your portfolio's performance to a reference level. Typically, that would either be the market or some other type of benchmark that is in the same concentration or industry or even asset mix of the respective investments. So the Trenner ratio first is ideal to use when your portfolio is strongly correlated to the market, since this formula compares the relative portfolio performance, or your portfolio, to the market performance with a term called beta. This beta term is a measure of volatility of a portfolio relative to the market itself and can give you an idea of what the systematic or market risk is as well for that reason. So in simple terms, what that means is that if the beta has a factor of 1 with reference to your portfolio and the market, that would mean that your portfolio is in line with how the market would perform. If the market goes up 1%, you would expect your portfolio also to go up 1%. On the downside, if the market went down 1%, you would also expect your portfolio to go down 1%. Now, to determine if beta is an appropriate factor to use, there's another term we'll use, which is called the coefficient of determination. It's a big fancy word, but essentially what it is it's the correlation squared. So on the information you supplied, you mentioned that the correlation of the equity portfolio with the market was 0.5%. So 0.5 squared would be 0.25. Now, one of the key things about utilizing beta is it's only effective to use when the portfolio's coefficient of determination is greater than 0.75. So in this case, that number is much smaller, so the Trenner ratio won't really be appropriate to use in order to assess if your portfolio has outperformed the market utilizing that term. Now, luckily, there's the other term you mentioned, the Sharpe ratio, which is very similar but uses a different measure to compare the relative performance. So the Sharpe ratio relies on the standard deviation of a portfolio, and since every portfolio that has a time series, in other words, that has been in existence, you can calculate that standard deviation for, and then the Sharpe ratio compares those two standard deviations to measure the relative performance. So in this case, you had a 12% market variation, and you had a 14% market variation within your portfolio. So if we crunch the numbers there to see what it would be, it turns out your portfolio has outperformed the market utilizing the Sharpe ratio, which again in this case is the best term to use because your portfolio is uncorrelated with the market. Now that does bring up some other questions that I have. With your portfolio being so deviated from the overall market, I would like you to do a little bit more research to see what type of investments those funds are. I have a list here. It simply supplies which funds they are, but I don't have any details about the underlying investments or industries. It does seem like the portfolio is very focused on probably non-conventional investments, maybe commodities or futures contracts or things of that nature that may be adding additional risk as well to the portfolio. Even though it is outperforming, given your time frame till retirement, it may be of consideration to look into that a little bit further and then just report back to me with either the prospectuses or just additional information. Now, there's also a question about the taxation of Nancy's bond portfolio. So Nancy had received this as a gift from her uncle a number of years ago. And her question today was, well, what would be the taxability if we were able to sell that here today at the fair market value, which was indicated at $40,000. One of the things that is an advantage for Nancy is since this is an appreciated gift, Nancy may be able to claim that annual exemption used by Frank when he made this gift if he hadn't claimed it. Now, there wasn't any information on whether he did or not, so if you could supply that with me here, I should be able to go through and see if her basis could be adjusted a little bit more upwards, and that would result in a smaller capital gain and less taxes due as well. I can happily report, however, since these bonds have been held for 5 years, they will fall under the long-term capital gains rate. So your capital gains rate currently, 25%, or I should say your income tax rate is 25%. And at that rate, your long-term capital gain is 10% lower at 15%. So that is, a significant amount that you're saving because you've been holding those bonds for a longer period of time. Also with that portfolio, I'm not really sure if there are any municipal bonds or corporate bonds, or if there's a mix of the two, since I just have some general information about the pricing. If you could supply those as well, we could determine, if you decide not to sell the bonds, if any or all of that interest is taxable on the federal level. We noticed here that you don't have any state taxes, so that's good to hear, but you still may be owing taxes on the federal level, and that should be considered if you can decide to hold on onto the bonds as opposed to sell them. Also, I'd like more information, again, to figure out which bonds they are, a list of those bonds that include the issuer, the face value, the coupon rates, and the payment date, so I can crunch all of those numbers to determine how they impact you most applicably. And just to kind of wrap up today, also notice that these two accounts that hold the respective equity investments and bond investments, there wasn't a list of beneficiaries that was supplied, so I don't know if there are any or not. If you were interested in having the assets bypass probate, it would be advisable to add a transfer on death plan to either or both of those investments as you see fit, where you could either name each other as beneficiaries, children, or whoever else you would like, so that you wouldn't have to worry about the assets going through that probate process, and then the spouse or other individuals have a relatively simpler process of taking claim of those assets that you desire to go to them. I'd like to thank you for your time this afternoon for stopping in, and I'm glad we could go over just a brief summary of some of the points you had, and I look forward to speaking with you in the future, hearing back about that information I requested, so that we can continue to put this plan in motion for you and devise the best recommendations moving forward. Thank you, and I do hope you both have a great afternoon.